Hey everybody, it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini, and welcome to WIP Wednesday episode number 96. I can hardly believe we're pulling up on 100 episodes of these live shows that we've been doing now for several years. So welcome everybody. Let's stop real quick and make sure that technology is working. I see a bunch of you are already tuning in the chat here. Awesome. Hi Maureen, tuning in from very hot Texas. She says, I'm coming to y'all here from my home crafting studio, and I live in North Central Florida where it is hot, rainy, stormy, and steamy outside. The humidity is 100%. I'm pretty sure of it right now. Let's see. Connie's in the house. Awesome. Hey, Shirley. Bettina is tuning in from Tennessee. Awesome. I feel like we have some new people on here. Maybe y'all have come from my latest tutorial that I posted on YouTube about a day and a half ago, and it's a popular one. So we're going to talk a little bit about it, and I'm going to share some tips because I did receive a really good question from my friend Jackie about that specific project. Great. Hi, Eunice. Thank you. Thanks for posting that you can see and hear me just fine. All right, so we are going to get started. Everything looks good. Let's go ahead and switch everybody over to my over-the-shoulder camera shot so we can talk about my latest tutorial. So on the Crafty Gemini YouTube channel, I posted a new free video tutorial. I tried my hardest, y'all, to get it to be under 20 minutes, and I just could not edit it down. I feel like there's so many tips and tricks and extra little things that I need to mention. So it's about 23-ish, 24-ish minutes, but it's a good one. I walk you through how to make these adorable Scrappy zippered pouches step by step, okay? If you're a quilter, I feel like most of the people that find my content are, you know you have fabric scraps. If you make small projects, you probably got fabric scraps left over. So if you do and you have some cute scraps that you want to use up, this is the perfect little project. This is the first one. Well, the second one I had made, because I always prototype the stuff as I'm working out the dimensions and designing the project. So this was the first one. And some of you that have been taking advantage of our half-yard fabric bundles from our online shop probably recognize some of these. If you've been at my last two quilting or sewing/quilting-ish retreats, we had bag making retreats that feature, you know, different techniques from sewing and quilting. You probably recognize some of these because they were in some of the kits also that we used in the last couple months of our retreats. Super cute. Loving it. And now one of the things, first let's talk a little bit about the tutorial. So this tutorial is a hit. Let's just say that. It has, I just checked a little while ago, I think over 26,000 views in less than 48 hours. It's like 30. And I was telling my husband, I'm like, it's like getting like 1,000 views an hour. So the YouTube algorithm must be very happy spreading the love and sharing my tutorial. So I would appreciate it if y'all did check out the video and you enjoyed it. Maybe you have some sewing friends that would like to learn how to make something like this. I would say it's pretty beginner friendly because all we're using is cotton fabric scraps, some batting, and one zipper. Okay, so pretty simple. And again, I walk you through every single step. So definitely check that out and feel free to share that tutorial with your crafty friends. Now, a couple things about this. One of them is the method in which I teach you in the tutorial how to piece the strip. So my friend Jackie is a quilter. She makes awesome, gorgeous works of fabric-y art, okay? And she's in a bunch of my classes. Now, she asked me the other day on my Facebook page when I posted about it, why did I piece the fabric scraps together first and then sew them onto the batting scrap? So this is how I show you how to do it in the video tutorial. Of course, step-by-step instructions there, but this is just for a demo because if any others of you that have watched the tutorial were thinking and like, why does she do it in 2 steps when you can do it in a quilt as you go method and save time, right? Well, as a teacher, I don't always just teach in the quickest, easiest way for myself. If it's something that I know beginners are or may run the chance of easily messing it up, I, as an instructor, want to set my students up for success. So even if it means one extra step in something or learning a new skill or technique, I'm going to do that when I'm teaching because I want y'all to, you know, to set you up for success so you have good results. And guess what happens when you have some successful results? If you're like me, when I first started sewing, you run around showing everybody, look what I made. It's lined. I can't believe it. And you're so excited. So then you go on and tackle the next project. So here is the difference, just for those of you, because some of you may be more advanced and not want to do it the way I taught it in the video. A lot of people that find my YouTube content are more beginners, and so I taught it in a specific way for them. So the way was, we sew all the little random scrappy bits together. I used a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then I had y'all place it on top of the batting strips, and then we kind of do some straight line stitching just to anchor down the fabric to the batting. The reason I did that is because as you do this and you stitch down somewhere here, it's easy for you to continue to smooth out the fabric on top of the batting strip before you go in and do your next line of stitching, okay? And as you can see probably from here, the lines of stitching are all over the place. It's a great scrappy project because you don't really have to think. For example, there's no intersecting points here that you need to match up from one row to the next like you would in a proper quilt, right, with quilt blocks. We hack these strips, we throw it together, we make a panel. Wherever the seams land, they land, and boom, you still end up with a super cute scrappy project, okay? So again, very beginner friendly, I would say. And so when you're quilting it, you can easily smooth it so that you get a straight and taut connection between the fabric and the batting strip. Okay, so if you watch the tutorial, or maybe you have watched it already, you know what I'm talking about and you've seen me do this, okay? The other way is, as Jackie suggested, why would I do it that way instead of this way? You can do it both ways. So here I'm going to show you, and I'm just going to cut a chunk off of here. By the way, you don't need to have this batting on a roll. We have this in our online shop, and we sell it in a huge roll like this. That's 50 yards rolled up. It's massive. It's way bigger than my hand, bigger than my face. Okay, so we do have those in stock in the shop. You can see I've been using mine quite a bit for different projects, but you can also just cut down your own batting, okay? Cut it down to 2.5-inch strips. I would say cut it down to at least the 14 inches because that's the length that we cut ours down to for making this specific pouch if you want to. But if you have long strips like we get on the roll, you know, you can use that too. So here's the other option that would save you the step of piecing and then separately going back to quilt again. You could do it in a quilt as you go method, and this has the selvage. That's obviously an actual, have to cut it down scrap. So you would start on one spot, smooth out your fabric, and then pick whatever the next chunk is that you want to sew to it, and you would place it on top, pretty sides touching. And then when you sew your 1/4 inch seam allowance to connect the two, you notice I have the batting strip underneath. So when I stitch right here, I'm catching the batting, and that's going to give me both a seam that will connect these two and an anchored down quilted seam, okay? So that's how you would do it all in one step to connect the fabric to the batting. However, I'm going to do a couple of these seams and I'm going to show you where the issue may arise for those of you that are a little bit less experienced with these types of techniques, okay? So let's pull my little machine in here. I'm going to scoop my needle over because we're using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then I'm going to leave the stitch length short, still 2.2 for one layer of batting and 2 pieces of fabric. This machine's not going to have any issues. It's not bulky at all. So now, okay, I stitched it through. I would open this up and press the seam one way. Okay, so again, my fabrics are stitched together, they're secured, and I have a stitch going through the batting so it will secure it. Okay, so here's what happens. Let me, a bigger chunk. I feel like that has a selvage on it. Just kidding. I'm going to do this one and then I'm going to do one bigger one right after it. So you would just continue to piece your little pieces like this. This is what we would call a quilt as you go method because you're sewing the fabrics and quilting at the same time. Okay, instead of like quilting after you make the quilt top. So if you're familiar with quilt making, then you know that these two techniques are, this would be the equivalent of piecing a quilt top and making a bunch of blocks and then placing it on top of the batting and stitching through that method, okay? So the quilt as you go, again, as I mentioned, you're doing them both at the same time. Now notice what I'm doing. I am very well versed in quilt as you go for larger pieces and smaller pieces. I would say if you're going to try it like this, make sure that you're smoothing everything out every single time before you attach the next piece. So this guy I mentioned had a selvage earlier. Let's cut it down, straighten off this edge. Don't mind me, you would obviously use scissors, but I'm okay at eyeballing. Here's what happens. You get into the groove, you know, you're just like, oh, this is super easy. I'm just going to put this piece on here. I'm going to sew. And to save time, as I did in the tutorial, many of you may not even take this to your cutting table or work surface. You might be just doing it right there on your machine, just going like this. Okay, we press the seam, I'm fine. I'm gonna go in and add the next piece. So here is where the mistake happens. Where you think that this bottom fabric is taut, But when you go to grab the layers, you mistakenly add a little bit of slack in there. And I'm going to sew it messed up so I can show you what happens. So yeah, okay, my edges are matching up. We're good. Let's go ahead and stitch this one down. And here's the mess up. Looks good from afar, okay? Look what happens. This fabric is not lying flat against the batting like the others. Can you see that? How it's bubbling? You can't get rid of that now. It's there, okay? So if you do go back in and do some additional stitching, you're gonna have a pucker or a pleat somewhere in your project. You're not gonna be happy, okay? So notice the difference between smoothing it all the way out and then putting the next piece before you go in and sew the seam versus, I mean, this is barely anything, and look at the big bubble that it left me there. That's no good. So that is the reason why in the video tutorial, I teach you to piece your whole strip first, and that way it's all together so you can more easily smooth it out over top of your batting strip before going in and doing the quilting. Additionally, I like the way that the quilting looks. You have random little lines here. Some of you that have maybe computerized sewing machines, you want to play around with some fun decorative stitches, you could do those decorative stitches and just instead of just straight vertical lines like I did in the tutorial, right? You can do a little bit here and there. If you do the quilt as you go method, you won't actually have these vertical stitching lines. You'll still have these top stitching ones if you want to add them like I do in the tutorial. But if you want to have kind of a little bit more texture, and I really like the kind of the fresh modern look that this one has, then you'll want to do it the same way that I teach you in the tutorial. Okay? All right, Winless Originals, I'm just popping into the chat here. Winless Original says, I watched your new tutorial yesterday. I can't wait to make it. Awesome. Make sure that you head over to either Instagram or Facebook if you use any of those social media platforms and post pictures. And then you can tag me using the hashtag Crafty Gemini or, Scrappy zipper pouch. We'd love to see what y'all are making. Okay? Thank you, Maureen. She says, I love how you explain things. I really appreciate that. Awesome. Debbie says, I have all my supplies ready to make this zipper pouch. I feel like everybody has scraps. People are like, oh, I have a ton of scraps. I have just a scrap bag to make that project, so that's great. LS Hale says, love, what a great idea for the scrappy bag. Super tutorial. Great. Hi, Rita. So Rita says she's new here. Hi. And Rita's asking, what does WIP mean? So WIP stands for Works in Progress. And I think we use that all across all types of crafting stuff. In crochet and knitting, I've heard it, even in spinning and stuff, and definitely in sewing and quilting, we call them WIPs. So works in progress. Thank you, Nancy. She says your vids are wonderful. Awesome. Okay, good. So hopefully that makes sense to y'all. And if you ever do anything quilt as you go and you end up with this, you know why. Okay? It's because the fabric was not taut against the batting itself. And it's the most annoying thing ever. Okay, sometimes you could maybe potentially fix it a little bit by if you catch it right after you do it like this, like I only have one additional piece of fabric. If you catch it here, you can obviously go in, rip out this seam, and then smooth it further out and then go back in and add it. Okay, the only other solution really at this point would be to sadly take a pleat right there with the fabric, something like that, and just stitch it down close there and act like it's a quilting stitch. But, there's options. We got options to fix our mistakes. Okay. Amanda says, if I'm cutting my own batting strips, how much will I need to make the zipper pouch? Yeah, so that's what I mentioned earlier. Just cut your 2.5-inch strips down to 14 inches long, and you need 4 of those for the front and 4 for the back. So you need 8 times 14 inches, which it's a little bit over 3 yards in length is what you'll need. All right, and I give all those measurements in the tutorial, so y'all can check that out there too. Oh, Margie says she's working on hers. Awesome. Jackie B, who was the one that asked me why I did it this way and not this way, she says that's why you're the teacher. I mean, I seem a little bit rushed sometimes, but I promise there is some thought behind what I'm doing. In some of our classes, like our workshops and things that people pay for, we have almost 100 online on-demand digital courses that my students can sign up for. They're obviously more in depth than a free video tutorial. And if you're signing up for a specific club or a specific class, then you probably already looked at the projects and okay, yeah, I think I have, close to that sewing skill level, I can attempt these projects. Whereas on YouTube, I know it's a lot of beginners mostly that are catching my stuff. And so I don't want to have them do this. And if I did, I would say, make absolutely sure that you smoothed it out before sewing the next one. But it can be a little tricky. If you're just new to sewing 2 layers, it takes a little bit of, you know, your hands and your brain getting used to manipulating a third layer underneath there with adding the bag. Okay. Sheila says, I can't wait to make 2 for my granddaughters. That's awesome. Hey, Zena. She says, great tip. Awesome. You're welcome, neighbor. Okay. So I wanted to mention that. That way, for those of you that maybe haven't made it yet or just thinking about looking into the tutorial and seeing what all goes into it, that's one of the tips and one of the reasons I teach it like that. But I am obsessed. And oh, another tip I was going to mention. So remember I said that this video, I'm like, oh, surprisingly, it's kind of popular. It has over 26,000 views already, and I just posted it a day and a half ago, maybe 30 hours ago, something like that. One of the main things in the comments that I'm receiving is people. One lady said, I think, she says, I've been sewing for over 40 years and I always learn something from your tutorials. She says she'd never seen anybody do what I do in the lining, where we sew a larger seam allowance on the lining side. So if you've ever made a zipper pouch, you know that if the pattern calls for it, or if you're designing it yourself, if you cut the exterior and the lining pieces to the same, you always will end up with a baggy lining on the inside, because it's filling in the real estate on inside of the bag, whereas the exterior is stretched out because it's on the outside, okay? And so what I do, which is kind of, I would say, a little bit more of an intermediate tip or technique to remember, I covered in all my online bag courses and clubs, but a lot of times people don't notice, like, or they don't know why. Like, why is my fabric not lying flat? You know, should I have used more interfacing? Should I have starched it more? But it's usually because the fabric was cut to the same size. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, watch my tutorial, because I think you'll learn some good tips there. And somebody else said, you know, I watch so many bag making and pouch making videos, she says, and I've never seen a designer do that, where you're sewing a larger seam allowance so that you get that nice fitted lining. I love that. Isn't that pineapple fabric cute? Adorable. Anyway, so there's a lot of little tips aside from the step-by-step instructional video on how to make my Scrappy Zip pouch. And speaking of that pineapple fabric, just another little quick plug for the half-yard bundle that we have listed in our shop right now. I think we only had a dozen left this morning. So if you like some of these fabrics that I featured in the bag that I made, they're not all in this bundle, but several of them are. 5 of them are at least. Definitely check it out, and I'm just going to go through them real quick. It's an underwater themed. Look at these mermaids. Y'all saw me. I fussy cut some of them. I think somebody commented on that too. She said, I love the fussy cut mermaids in the pouch. There's the pineapple print. And these are, each one of these prints, they're art gallery fabrics. They're 100% premium cotton, and they're half-yard cuts. Okay, so you get a total of 2.5 yards. This is such a pretty geometric shape too. It could be used as a border or some type of strip, or you can chop it up like I did in the scrappy bits of the pouch. And this is a super light buttery colored floral. Really pretty, a blender. Okay, so I think we only have a dozen of those. So if you like that bundle, go ahead and grab it, because we're on the 5th bundle already that we've been selling as these little kind of flash sale half-yard bundles. And once we're out, okay? Hi, Carla. She says, I'm finally catching you live. Awesome. Yay. Hey, Laura. Laura's tuning in from Maryland. She says, this is such a great way to get through my favorite fabric scraps. It is. And you know what? Also, not just your favorite fabric scraps, but if you have chunks of fabrics, maybe a quilt that you made 10 years ago, and you're just like, what was I thinking when I picked that fabric? Notice how small these bits are. They're 2.5 inches in one dimension, and then the other way, you can cut them as wide or as narrow as you would like. And so scrappy projects like this, I find, are super fun to cut up fabrics that maybe you don't love. So you could use your favorite fabrics, but you could also use fabrics that you don't really love too much, because when you just have a little sliver of it, if it has a color that complements or even contrasts against the majority of the other scraps you're using, it's great to add just a little pop of something in there, and you won't really see too much of the print. So if you don't love it, but it kind of has colors that pull on some of the other scraps, I would say throw it in there too. Sally's asking, do you pre-wash your fabrics before doing a project? Y'all have heard me say this before. I only pre-wash fabrics for garments. If you're using high quality, like the premium cotton fabrics that we sell in our shop that are designer quality quilting cottons, the manufacturers themselves tell you you don't really need to pre-wash it. But y'all know that we like to do a cheater pre-wash here, which is pre-shrinking it using starch, which is the moisture part, and then the heat of a dry iron is what helps it steam, and so it pre-shrinks it a little bit, but I don't go through and wash high-quality cottons. The only other ones that I sometimes will actually pre-wash if it's a quilting cotton and it's not a garment, are like the deep reds or blues of batiks. But I don't tend to use batiks very often, but those are really saturated in the dye, and those I will usually pre-wash just to get rid of some of the excess, okay? Thank you, Maureen. She says, everyone, don't forget to give Vanessa a thumbs up below the video. Yeah, if you're enjoying this video and you're getting some tips from it, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you're new here and catching us on YouTube, make sure that you hit the subscribe button so you'll get notifications of these live shows as well as any free video tutorials that I post, okay? Okay, let me take a sip. Okay, so let's move on. The next thing I have here on my little list is, okay, I talked about the fabric bundle, is, oh, the batting on a roll. I told you all that. We do have them in the shop. And then let's move on to my actual WIP. This is a work in progress. That has been a work in progress for, I don't know, a week now or so, but I don't work on it every day. I actually haven't even looked at it in over a week. So let me grab my stuff from right here. I'm just going to slide it over. Okay. Scraps over there, here, here, here. I put all my stuff that I need to talk about in a stack. Okay, so let's move this out the way. So first of all, if you follow me on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube Shorts, you have probably seen I did go ahead and take some little video clips of the process of making this quilt. So my kids are getting ready to leave to sleepaway camp in a couple of weeks, and it says they need a lightweight blanket, which I had posted on Facebook that basically to a quilter means time to make a new quilt. The lightweight part is just going to be the batting for me. And y'all know that my favorite lightweight batting to use is Quilter's Dream cotton batting, 100% cotton batting Request. So Request is the name of the loft. So their thinnest one is called Request. The next one up is Select. That's the loft thickness. It's like a medium, you know, mid-weight quilt, like your run-of-the-mill quilt. But we live in Florida. And they're going to sleepaway camp in the Dominican Republic, where my family is from. So although it's in the mountains, it does cool off in the mornings because it's really high elevation. It's going to cool off in the morning, so they just need something light. Well, my daughter went into our online shop, fabric bolts, and she picked out these fabrics. Somebody had asked me on Facebook, like, what collection is that? And I had to laugh because I'm like, none of these are from any collection. They don't even go together. There's different manufacturers in here. And somehow she did such a great job picking them. She has a great eye for color. She's the artist of the family. And look at this. It has this fresh, outdoorsy, animal-loving, nature-loving vibe, which is totally her. We have a Robert Kaufman print here with these little tigers. They're super cute. And actually, some of these prints are listed for sale. They're on clearance in our online shop. Not all of them, but whatever is left of some of these. I think these bees we do have in there. These little doves we do. The tigers, the gators I think are listed on there. There's little swampy gators. There's birds, there's bees, there's different types of florals. I mean, so cute. Isn't that adorable? And so she picked out the fabrics first, and then I thought, this is kind of so low volume to me, you know? The bright colors are like this. This is like the brights in here. But we then went through all my quilt books because, of course, kind of last minute. I don't really have time to be designing a whole new quilt design. And so we went through our books, and she also picked this one, which is wild because she picked the fabrics, she picked the quilt, and based on the quilt design that she chose, I was like, this can work. We have one, two, three, four lights, okay, that they're just different shades of a light neutral. Then you need, if you can look at this block, you see that this gray print here kind of creates a little square with a little snippet of each in each of the quadrants, right? So this one, I had to convince her to use this one because it wasn't one that she originally chose, but I convinced her. She was like, yeah, put it in there because the gray is the same as a lot of the grays in the other prints. And so I put this one in here. So I have light, a little slightly darker. I mean, these are still really light colors, and then light, so that this kind of pops a little bit more with that gray. And it was wild because when I looked at the design, I was like, this is actually going to work perfectly for this. So anyway, the link to this book, this is my friend Gudrun's, one of her books. She's an amazing quilt designer and teacher. This one is called Stripology Mixology 2. There's 13 quilts here in multiple different sizes. They work with a lot of, they could be pre-cuts, but obviously I cut from yardage to make my own stuff here. 10-inch squares, 5-inch squares, 2.5-inch strips, and 1.5-inch strips. And then she uses the Stripology rulers, and then there's added cocktail recipes for each. That's why it says mixology. So make sure that it's Stripology Mixology number 2. I have 1, 2, and 3, but it's in this one. And this is the Trixie quilt that Allie chose. You can see it here done up in a different, obviously a different colorway, but I was like, oh, this is gonna work, right? So we have kind of brighter colors for hers on the 4 little bits here, like the 4 half square triangle, the 1/2 of the half square triangles. And then you have those lights, and then you can see that little interior kind of square that I just mentioned with the other gray print in my quilt. In the sample in the book, it's done in blacks and whites. So super duper cute. And then in the book, they give you different layouts. So this is layout 1, which is the one that we're doing. Obviously, it comes in 5 different sizes. I'm working on the lap size one. I think Margie had messaged me last week and said something about the quilt, and I was like, I've worked on it for 1 hour this morning, and I finished half the blocks. It is such a quick make that I'm for sure going to say it's beginner friendly. You can see here how this is the one layout, and then she also gives you here several other layouts. So with the same blocks that you make, you can, orient them different ways to get. This would be, back in the days when I first started designing quilts, I came up with like a bunch of different quilt designs that were what I would call my solo block quilts. It was like we would make one block, and then based on how you oriented it, you would get these secondary and tertiary designs, layouts. So this is the same idea here, and I love to see it. So, and then you have your little cocktail drinks. If you don't drink, just ignore those. You still have 13 quilt designs in here. So I put the link to this Stripology Mixology 2. My Amazon affiliate link is in the description box below. If you're catching us on Facebook, the link is in there for you to check it out. And then I just wanted to share with y'all some of these blocks. Let's go ahead and show them where I am so far with the quilt blocks. If you can put up the picture of my design wall where the blocks have to be pieced up, Mr. Wilson. Just the quilt picture. So each block is this, y'all, and you can see how it's made up there. That's the where I am right now. I mean, I have all the blocks done. So they're all done. These are just the ones that I had on the table here are where I pieced together 4 to make the larger block. They're each made up of. So obviously, I think what I have on my wall here is slightly different to what y'all are seeing right there because I've been playing around with the blocks, and I love to kind of step away from it so I can play with the contrast. And it's a little bit tricky because of these fabrics here, I don't have a lot of variety of the bigger chunk of the half square triangle ones. And so I have directional prints as well. And so I'm working with how to orient them so the tigers are still upright, so the gators are still upright. I think I'm going to end up with 2 of the blocks where they're sideways instead of upright. But I think sideways is still better than upside down. Don't you think? All right, you can get rid of that picture for now. And I have a couple weeks to finish this quilt. I'm going to work on it little by little, I think, this weekend. I just need to piece the quilt top. I need to get the project that I currently have on my long arm off. And I'll be, taking little video clips of the process so I can show y'all what I decide to do for the quilting. It's just going to be easy all over because I want it to still be lightweight enough for her to easily roll it up and throw it in her the duffel bag that she's taking to camp, okay? But yes, it's a gorgeous design, and I think that's so cool because you can see it in the book is one way, but I always like to show it. If you're seeing it done up in one specific colorway, you might look at this and think, I don't really like reds and yellows. But you can make it in any color that you want, Just have something that pops a little bit more for these bigger chunks, and then play light, light, slightly darker, light, light. That's it. There's not even that many fabrics, and it's, super, super easy to whip up, okay? Beginner friendly for sure. JC Louis is asking, what kind of fabric do you use on your wall to keep the squares from falling off? So in the picture that y'all just saw, and I've been doing this for 15 years, there's no design wall. I take a chunk of batting that I buy off a roll, like when Joann's puts their batting on sale. I buy the batting by the roll because I have long arm machines that, we quilt quilts on. And so I just cut a long chunk and I push pin it right into the drywall of whatever studio space I'm working in. And that is my design wall. That's it. That's all I do. I just put, and it can be cotton batting. I've done it with polyester batting, and I've done it with cotton and polyester blended batting. And it just sticks to it. Especially if it's cotton batting, the cotton fabric just sticks. Like you just put the block on it, smooth it out, and it stays. Okay. Janice, the quilt is so great, gorgeous. Vanessa, do you ever sleep? I do, believe it or not, 8 hours every single night, if not more. I have to, y'all. I have to sleep. Sleep is my thing. Okay. Thank you. I work really fast, and so that's why I thought, let me mention this project because this is a great resource, this book. 13 quilts for the book. It's literally for almost the price of 2 quilt patterns, like 2 individual patterns. You have a little resource guide here, especially for those, like specifically for those times like I just mentioned. My daughter needs a new quilt. I don't have time to design a new one. I don't have time to be searching, scounging the internet, you know what I mean? Like trying to find it. I gave her a stack of books and was like, boom, here you go, find one. And there it was. Super easy peasy, okay? So I'm super happy with it. Remember that you can make it out of whatever fabrics you want. But look, gators are upright, upright. Tigers are upright. I did good. Okay, so let me move these blocks aside. And I'll mention to you, because remember I said that those Stripology ones, the quilt in the book, 10-inch squares, 5-inch squares, 2.5-inch strips, and 1.5-inch strips. That quilt doesn't have any 1.5-inch strips, but you know, there's 13 patterns in the book. And she calls for, or she recommends the Stripology rulers, of course, because she's also the designer of these Stripology rulers. There's so many of them. I think they're even pre-selling another one. This one that I have right here is the Stripology squared ruler. If you've never seen these, they have slots inside, okay? This might seem super confusing, and it can be if you don't know what you're doing, or if you're letting all the stuff around you, the numbers, the little shapes and stuff throw you off. That's why I like having it with the book or with some of her patterns, because it kind of walks you through, and the pattern itself will tell you. If you're using, you know, here's what you do with the ruler. You can put stickers on them. That's what I do. Remember, we've talked about these before in previous WIP Wednesday episodes. We have these in our shop. I bought them from Gudrun, and we carry them in our shop. They're great to label any rulers. Y'all have seen me use them on my 5-inch by 10-inch rulers, but specifically on these Stripology rulers, they work great because you can see I have some of these turquoise colored ones, and I'm pointing to what slits I need to run my rotary cutter through, because if, if you make a wrong cut and you put that blade in the wrong slit, you're going to need more fabric, right? Let me grab some of these chunks here. And these are leftovers that I had because remember, I didn't use pre-cuts. I cut my own yardage down to the 10-inch squares. Let's not cut these little tigers. I can use that for something else. Let's do this blender one. So it will tell you, you know, whatever the pattern is, and in that book it will tell you where you need to align this, you know, match up the bottom edge with this white line that says this. There's white and black lines. The solid black lines are like full inch increments. There's white lines under here. You probably can't see too good, but there you can kind of see it. Those white lines there are for the half, so like 8.5, 7.5 inch increments. And I'm just going to cut a couple strips just to show you how the slit part of it works. I'm not, you know, following any type of pattern or anything. But say you wanted to cut, oh, you know what I can do? I can cut a couple 2.5-inch strips. So say you were going to cut 2.5-inch strips. Now, I will be honest, I don't use this for all my strip cutting. I bring out my Stripology rulers when I'm following one of Gudrun's patterns from the books or these other little patterns that I have bought from her, because I just want to see, you know, what are they telling you to do? How do you use the ruler? Y'all know I love cutting. Cutting is my most favorite part of the entire quilt making process. So I'm not someone who's going to buy the ruler to help me necessarily with the cutting, but I like it where they have shapes here. It tells you where exactly to align things, so it can make things pretty simple, but just like anything else, y'all, it's going to have a learning curve. So say this was an off cut here, and I wanted to clean it off, clean off a straight edge like you would before we start cutting, and then cut 2.5, 2.5, 2.5. And I feel like I need to put something right there because that glare is kind of annoying. My lights. Fixed. Okay, so I go here at 0, and at the bottom where the slit starts, there's a little teardrop, and we put the link. This, I mean, they're not cheap because this is a lot of acrylic, right? This is a fancy ruler, and I think this is like 50, 60 bucks, something like that. But anyways, if you have the books, you're gonna have a lot of options, different patterns. But I was gonna say my Amazon affiliate link for the ruler is also in the description box below. Okay, so what I did was I lined up this line a little bit in from the side so I can get rid of a little bit of waste. And this square obviously was not cut great to size, but you put the blade of your rotary cutter, and I think I've read somewhere where this works with like all the different manufacturer blades or manufacturer rotary cutters except a couple or something like that. But if you have the Olfa ones, they work fine. So I'm just cutting along the slit, and you can just pull it out anywhere. The only time you need to use the teardrop on the ends is when you're inserting the blade, because it can be a little tricky to get it. I mean, it's such a fine slit right there. Well, I cut at 0, so I know that's going to be a clean edge. And then I can come over here to 2.5. And every 2.5-inch increments, they have a shape. So the squares on this ruler are 2.5 inches apart. So if you know that you're cutting a big chunk and you just need all the strips to be 2.5, all you got to do is look down for the square. And I'm cutting right where the square is. There's another square here, and that way you're kind of taking the math out of it, and you don't run the risk of being 1/2 inch off or 1 inch over or whatever. I'm just cutting where the squares are, and then I keep going. And here's my next one. There's no sense in cutting, right? Because I don't have fabric there. And so then I would stop. So when you remove the ruler, I have the little bit that I shaved off at the beginning. And then I have a 2.5 inch, 2.5 inch, 2.5 inch. And I know that this one wasn't enough to get me to the next 2.5 inch. So I know that that's less, and you would put that with your scrap pile. Okay? But this really helps people, because if you have trouble cutting, and if you are one of those where like you slide over the ruler every time you make a cut, you know that after 2 or 3 cuts you got to stop, clean it off again to straighten the edge, and then continue cutting. You don't have to do that here because you're not constantly picking up the ruler and moving it, right? The weight of the ruler is anchoring your fabric down, and then you just go swoop, 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 swoop. It does take a little getting used to. Like when I first was dropping it in the little teardrop, I was like, is the blade in or not? And now it's nothing. You know, I just can drop it really, really quick. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I have some questions up here. Let's see. Zena's asking, should we always use a bigger seam allowance in all bags, or is it just for pouches? I feel like the bigger the inside of the bag, the bigger the seam allowance I take. Because the more of fabric you have floating around on the inside, the more you want to cinch it up so you get a smooth lining. So it's on pouches, it's on bags, and all that kind of stuff where you have a big chunk of fabric floating on the inside. All right. Let's see. Carol says, I have the Stripology XL and have never used it. It's so confusing. Oh my gosh. That is an expensive ruler, and it can do so much. You should take that out, Carol. Put it to use. I know Gudrun on her channel, she has a ton of videos and tutorials and quilt alongs, and I would say because it can be overwhelming. I mean, you look at this and you're just like, huh? What am I going to do with this? Just pick one project and go from there. You know, use it just for that, so you'll ignore the rest of the lines, all the markings. But there is a lot going on because it can do a lot, you know? So yeah. Oh, Anne says, I have one of those rulers and I love it. Yes. And that's what Pam is talking about, what I just mentioned. She says the strip rulers help prevent the bowing in the strip. Yes. If you anchor it straight, if you're cutting it on the fold, then I think we talked about this last time, where like, if you cut fabric on the fold like this and it's not on grain, you can end up, when you open up that folded up strip, you can end up with a strip that goes like this, like a little elbow in it instead of being a nice square. Okay? Let's see. Nice, I mean, square on the corners, I mean, like a nice straight strip. Okay. Yes, Diana says, I want that ruler. And I put a link, my Amazon affiliate link to this one, the Stripology squared ruler that I have, or I put the link to it in the description box, and it's also in the caption here on the Facebook post if that's where you're catching us, okay? All right, and I think that's it. That's all I had to chat about. The quilt, I have to finish up these blocks, and I'll piece the quilt up, and I'll keep filming a couple of different little video clips and stuff and sharing y'all the progress on that. All right? Okay. Oh, Deborah says, I had one, but I couldn't cut with it, so I gave it away. It does take a little getting used to, but with the teardrop, once you kind of get the hang of just dropping the blade straight in there. And you know what I found too is that a lot of students, when I was teaching in person in my shop, a lot of people will go like this with the rotary cutter. Instead of cutting straight, they cut at an angle because they want to be able to see exactly where it is next to any ruler. And so like say this was just a straight ruler, they cut like this, so that they can make sure that the blade is right up against the edge of the ruler. And so you don't really want to be practicing a bad technique like that. The rotary cutter needs to be running straight like this along the side. I mean, this here kind of varies. I like to have it slightly down at more of a 45-degree angle. Not like this. You're going to mess up your wrist probably. And not like this, because this kind of is down there. You're not getting enough of that downward pressure coming from your shoulder, right? So you don't want to be cutting like this. So if you got into the habit of cutting slanted like that, this ruler is going to be a nightmare for you because you can't cut like that on here, right? So if it's going straight up and down like that in the slit, I cannot bend it. I'm going to start chipping out chunks of the acrylic and mess up my blade too. Okay, so keep that in mind. Just you know, work with it, practice a little bit. It's a good one. Okay. Oh, thank you, Gwen. She says, I watch lots of YouTube quilters. I love the way you use your cameras. Girl, we try. We've gone through so many camera setups and so many lenses. We got a little something going on here that I think tends to work, especially for my instructional style. And that way y'all can see my over-the-top exaggerated facial expressions too. It helps to add the facial expressions to the voice. Okay. Well, thank you. Oh my gosh, Zena says, I guess I've been doing it all wrong. Just practice, Zena. Try to think about that next time you go to cut. Keep it straight up and down, at least the blade. Keep the blade straight up and down. All right? Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. If you haven't yet, where did I throw those pouches? Over here. If you haven't yet checked out my latest tutorial on the YouTube channel, definitely check it out. I know you'll learn some little tips, even if you're a more advanced sewist and quilter. There are some really fun little tips here. We talked a little bit about constructing the strips. You know, you can choose to do it whichever way you want. If you've been tuning in here, just make sure that you're smoothing out the fabric so you don't end up with the fabric bubbling on you when you go to do it if you're choosing that quilt as you go method. Share the video if you enjoyed this tutorial. When you go check it out, give it a thumbs up and share it with your crafty friends so we can keep feeding the YouTube algorithm so that more and more people can watch my tutorials. And I'm excited because I am working on more freebie tutorials for y'all on the YouTube channel, okay? If you're not yet subscribed to my email newsletter, definitely do that too because we send out a bunch of information there, sales, new videos, new courses, new clubs, and all of that. And you can find it at craftygemini.com/newsletter or right there from the homepage at craftygemini.com. You can add yourself to the email list as well. Okay, so thanks everybody. I hope you find some time the rest of this week to do something a little crafty for yourself. And I will see y'all next week. Or is next week July 4th? I won't see you next week. We have work to do in our community, volunteering. Should be fun. So we'll see y'all next time. Have a good one, y'all. Bye.